Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to Data Platform Downunder, where this afternoon session, we've got Matt Gordon, who's going to be talking to us about how to use AI to make your job easier and more fun. This session is being recorded and will be made available after this session on the Data Platform Downunder YouTube channel. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, feel free to go and subscribe there. I will put the link into the chat window, and you'll be able to go back and rewatch not just this session, but all of the other recorded sessions that we've done over the last 2.5 years with all of our presenters who are supporting us all learn all things about Data Platform. Now, at any point in time, I will be monitoring the chat window, but feel free to put your questions into the chat window. Put it if you can preface that with a Q, or you can also raise your hand, and I'll be able to see that, and we can get you to ask your question appropriately to Matt during that time. So with that, I'll hand over to Matt to take us through this month's session.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely encourage questions. You always want this to feel as much like an in-person event as you can, where there's a lot of back and forth. So yeah, feel free to put those in chat, preface by Q. It's a little bit hard for me to monitor the chat the way the other screen lines up, but just throw them in there or raise your hand. There's a lot of kind of built-in breaks as I switch back and forth to demos here and all that. And I'd also ask, I'm getting a little background noise, so if you're not on, just go ahead and mute, and we will roll on here. All right, so you notice I put both dates on because it's still October the 9th for me for an hour and 26 minutes. But thanks for having me. It's always fun to present to groups anywhere, but especially pretty far away. So hopefully you get something fun out of this. So I'm a senior architect in data and analytics for Centric Consulting here in the States. I am SQL at speed everywhere online. I've written a couple books, one kind of about this, and we'll talk about that, not for the purposes of you buying it, but that would be fun. But just to kind of understand the evolution of the branding and marketing around this and why it might be in some tools and areas of the Microsoft ecosystem that you don't know because the naming is a bit confusing. I also do a lot of cloud migration work as well and was able to contribute to a book on that. So it's cool, but it also gives me two pictures that line up next to the picture of the race car that I get to drive 8 or 9 times a year. So if you're a fan of motor racing, feel free to reach out, chat about that. Formula One, IndyCar, anything like that. I watch it all and we'll talk your ear off about it. So apologies in advance. So we kind of went through this in the networking part. Not much interesting here, just says I've been around a while. I have worked in kind of the Azure AI space, speaking on it, presenting, writing, a little bit of blogging since 2017. And I also lead the data technology group local to me. So while I'm talking about that, that's where I am. So kind of Eastern Central US. I usually say how far away I am from where I'm speaking. Suffice it to say tonight, it's very far. And it depends on where you are there compared to me, but many thousands of miles. But to go back to this slide, if this is your first time at a meetup like this at all, virtual, in person, whatever, welcome. If you weren't on to hear us chat about this, yeah, almost exactly 10 years ago now, I went to my first past summit. Arguably did everything wrong, didn't talk to anybody, went to every session, took furious notes and all that, learned a ton, but slowly kind of understood how to get out of my comfort zone a bit. And going to that event, learning that stuff, the connections I made at that first one and ones after that absolutely changed my life. I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't know some of the folks on this call. I wouldn't have had some of the jobs I've had, all that. So welcome. Find a way to be involved, whether it's speaker, volunteer organizer, whatever. It's a great world to be a part of. It's pretty exciting time to be doing what we do. Data's everywhere and it's not going anywhere. And AI is probably here to stay too. So without further ado, so I don't know if that's the AI that some people have in mind, but from talking to some of my friends, both technical and non-technical, this is a little bit the impression that they have. That you see all the all the fearsome headlines about, oh, it's going to take over a bunch of people's jobs and do this and that. And we're going to talk for a few slides about kind of what we think. So this is probably the most, I won't say forcibly interactive part of the talk because that sounds awful. But hopefully people have some opinions to share. Otherwise, you're just going to have to listen to mine, and I'm sorry about that. So let's get into it. So what is it? So I was already kind of working on this because there's some interesting places that you would argue AI powered stuff, which is certainly an overused buzz phrase now, creeps into the kind of work that all of us do, whether we're DBAs, report devs, analytics people, data architects, whatever. But when my dad asked me what ChatGPT does, I was like, well, this has hit the mainstream. And I was struggling at that time to figure out, like, well, how do I want to start this? Because obviously it's everywhere in the news, but I wasn't sure how to dive into the topic itself. And you don't just want to dive into a bunch of demos, or at least I don't. This is kind of what I came up with. So what is AI and what isn't it? And then we'll talk about, for data people, what it is. So the media, it seems like, says it's ChatGPT, right? That's the vast majority of the headlines, even though Google has Bard, and there's a lot of these LLMs from Google and Meta, and Amazon's doing stuff, but ChatGPT really caught the attention of most, and it's almost become kind of that shorthand for the, you go talk to a bot that's really, really smart if you don't know how all this stuff works. And I do have a link on my resources slide if you're curious about how all this stuff works. This session does not go into that, but Buck Woody gave an excellent session a couple of weeks ago that was recorded for another virtual group, and I linked to that, and it goes into really how it works. Very deep. Buck's very smart, very funny, great talk. But so we're going to keep it at this level for here. So some people say it's a lot of hype. I gave this talk in person about a week and a half ago at SQL Saturday, Minnesota, and I was really happy that one of the people in there, and he wasn't mean about it at all. It was before I got to the slide. I just said, what is AI to any of us in here? And there were students in there and all kinds of data pros. And he said, oh, it's overhyped, which was a perfect transition into this slide. But, there is a lot of hype around it. Some of it's justified, some of it's not. And that was really kind of the driving force behind this talk, as I was, going out to clients, and we'd be asked by some people at the executive level, tell us what we can do with AI, because my boss, my manager, my VP, chief executive, whatever, wants to do that. And then you talk to people at some different levels, and they would say, oh, it's all hype, it doesn't matter, it's all a waste of time. It's not all hype. It is all around us, which hopefully by the end of this next hour or so, you'll see that that's true. The closest I'm going to get to talking about how it works is basically something my son said. So when I wrote that book, I'd say he was round about 10 when I was putting together the acknowledgments. And he had been asking, well, Dad, what's the book about? I said, well, it's pretty complex. He had taken like a little summer coding boot camp online. So obviously something like neural networks and the, other kind of models like that are well beyond that. But I told him, I said, well, it's something that tries to understand maybe the language you are speaking and what those words meant. Were they positive? Were they negative? It might look at a picture and try to figure out how old you are, and are you happy? Are you sad? Are you scared? Those sorts of things. He's like, how does it do that? I said, well, I'm not smart enough to explain that. But it makes a lot of decisions pretty fast based on things it's seen or heard before. And he said, oh, I get it. It's just a bunch of if-then statements that run really fast, which in a manner of speaking, I guess, is not untrue. What I think the most accurate definition, though, is, and that's why I closed the slide with it, is that last one. And I'm not going to read it off, but, it's talking about kind of the development of systems that are, let's say, approximating human intelligence and kind of human reactions to certain things. And that gives a pretty good summary, honestly, right there of kind of some of the highlights that are certainly the easiest to demo and the easiest for us to kind of play with. And my hope is that you come out of this hour with something that you're like, well, that was cool. I'd like to I'd like to learn more about that. I want to go play with that and see what I can do with it. So I'll tell you right now, some of my examples, well, they're all using really cool tech. Some of them are silly. And my hope is that you'll think of that and be like, A, that was really funny, or gee, that was really dumb, but I see what you could do with it. Either way, I'm fine. So for data people, what is this to us? So for a lot of it, and you're starting to see this more and more, it's Copilot experiences in our development environments. They're not everywhere yet, but you can certainly see if you followed Microsoft's announcements really since the start of the year, but especially since Build, there's Copilot experiences they're announcing across their entire ecosystem. There's no reason to think it'll stop anytime soon. So for a lot of folks, that may be the first time you encounter that. It's like, oh, well, I've got Copilot in here now. And it's not just the coding environment. So that's, what's kind of caught some people's attention, and rightfully so, because it's really cool. But it's even on some of the low code and no code things. And we'll see one of those later, because I actually tried to start out writing the demo a different way and it didn't work. And Copilot helped me quite a bit. For some people, it's, it's a robot. It's going to tune my code and it's going to tune the dev's code, and performance tuning, we don't need it anymore, and all that. I don't agree with that at all, but certainly there are advances being made in I would say some basic tuning and the automatic ability to do that. I feel like across a few different database platforms, we've heard a lot about automatic query tuning and things like that. And while there are advances being made, and for some of our fellow data pros, it's this, I don't think it's at the point where it's replacing somebody. That third one we just talked about a second ago. It could be ChatGPT helping us program in a language we don't know. I'm actually working on a project right now. Can't say with who, not because it's secret. It's just they're a company that's large here and they don't like us sharing that. But their data ecosystem is very diverse. It's a big company. They've grown by acquisition a bit. So you have your little kind of fiefdoms of, we like Databricks, we like this, we use Fabric, we use this language, we use that, whatever. I can probably read all of those, but I'm certainly not going to write those not all of them at a high level day one. Things like ChatGPT can really help me, and a lot of other folks. Somebody comes to you and says, I need a bit of Python that does this. Well, I'm not very experienced in that. ChatGPT may not write it perfectly first time out, may not write it perfectly ever, but it's going to put you well ahead of where you would have been hitting up Stack Overflow and Google and Bing and all those things. And AI is coming to those search engines too. So, there's a lot of different ways where we can spend a lot of time around these tools helping us. The fourth one is close to my heart because it's actually a member of our user group. So I don't know how many folks well across the pond know Steve Hughes, but I used to work with him. His daughter, Christina, presents as well. She's a co-organizer of my user group. Steve's been fighting ALS for a couple of years, and AI-powered tools, as much as I think a lot of us don't like that phrase, have been amazingly helpful to him, both in terms of quality of life at home and things he's able to do, but also work, and also still blogging and doing a lot to contribute to us online and in person as well. So some of these tools, sure, maybe they're a little bit overhyped and maybe they're kind of flavor of the month kind of things, but they really are changing people's lives. I would love to see a session. I know that Microsoft's did a couple at Build that were very salesy. I would love to see a community-driven session on that to really help us all kind of realize how much these can help people and maybe spark that next great idea too. But I don't want you to walk out of this talk not thinking about that, because the rest of it might get goofy. It might also be an annoyance too. I'm already talking to, I would say, some executive types. It's like, well, we went to our fancy executive meeting and, AI is going to replace my this team, my that team, all those things. And I'm not going to need them because the AI will do it all. No. But it is something we might have to contend with, because a lot of times, and I've found this especially in the data field, sometimes it's very easy to say what we do. Like, I ask a database a question, information comes back, and to somebody non-technical, they're like, well, that doesn't sound too hard. You just figure out a place to put it, you write whatever the language is to talk to it, job done. No, but managers that have that kind of mindset, unfortunately, they are out there, think of some of this stuff as like, well, I can replace all those people with just that. So we'll come back to that, because a couple of our demos, we're going to put ourselves in the place of somebody who just took a job at a place with a manager like that. But so I mentioned earlier that I kind of wrote a book on this stuff. So what was interesting to me is I put this slide together just really with my own thoughts, having spoken and written on this for the better part of the last 6 years, kind of my evolution in understanding, because for me the branding used to be clear and it's a little fuzzy now, but I understand why. So you see a lot all over the various documentation slides, marketing things, all that, talking about Azure AI. You also see stuff talking about Azure Cognitive Services, although a lot of it kind of comes together. And what was really interesting for me is one of the closing speakers at SQL Saturday Minnesota was a Microsoft person who presented a technical deck. It wasn't a marketing deck, but it included the latest version of their kind of marketing slide for all this stuff, all the AI-powered, AI-driven stuff. And I found the page, and I think others did too, just based on hearing what people were saying, a bit confusing, because it shows Azure Cognitive Services as part of Azure AI, and it shows Azure OpenAI as part of Azure AI, but also depicts some of the services and some of what they do in a different way, kind of in a different spot of the diagram. So I'm going to go over all this just to kind of tell you, in many ways, it's all kind of the same thing. Technically, that's not true. Under the covers, you're still calling some of the APIs I wrote and blogged about years ago. They just call them language service instead of language API or whatever. But whether the doc says Azure AI, Cognitive Services is some blend of those two, what we're talking about is really this core stuff. And there's a link on my resources slide at the end, and these will be up on GitHub just as soon as I'm done. So there's the speech service, which does kind of a lot of the stuff you would think it does. Speech to text, text to speech. We've got a demo later that, one of the things, and if you followed the news or followed movies a bit, one of the things you're even able to do in Speech Studio for not a lot of money at all is create a custom neural model of your voice. So you're familiar with this from some movie news and things like that, with actors and subjects of films that have passed away where the dialogue wasn't complete, or the director of the film wanted that dialogue in the film spoken by that person, and whoever's in charge of their estate or whatever granted the ability to do that. Speech Studio does all those kinds of things. It can recognize speakers as well. So it's a great assistant, like transcribing a meeting. Let's say we were all trying to talk on this. There's 20 odd of us. That would be really hairy for a human to figure out that Matt said this and somebody else said that and somebody else said that. So speech is a great time saver for things like that too. Language kind of goes hand in hand with it. You'll see those played together quite often. And a lot of these talk under the covers using JSON. So they can work together to do certain things. It's a bit beyond the scope of this talk, but just kind of bear that in mind as we see some of this stuff. So language will do like language recognition, language translation, transliteration as well. So if you're translating from a language in one alphabet to a language in another one, it will handle that as well. That's very cool stuff. Language is kind of what got me into this. So I always have a soft spot in my heart, whether they call it an API or a group of APIs or a service. That's what got me thinking this stuff was cool. Vision. So you've probably seen kind of the party game demos a bit, where somebody smiles into a camera and it tries to judge their age and their emotion and other characteristics. Those are interesting. Those have certainly come a long way from the first few times I saw them. One of the examples that's always stuck out to me, and it's not a plug for the book, but it's in the book because we thought it was cool, is there was a state here, and I believe it was the Department of Public Works, so they managed like dams and lakes and things like that. They used at the time cognitive services vision wired up to a series of cameras around all the dams to essentially monitor state changes in the image that would send back. So at this point, this is a few years ago, it would send a still image back every so often. And that would then feed a program calling this API and a couple other ones to do an analysis to say, oh, the level of the lake has changed, 10 feet in 15 minutes. That means either the dam has had a failure, we're going to have a flood, something like that. So vision can be very reactive to what it sees and not just kind of a fun game, but you can do a lot of fun stuff with it. Decision exists. I would welcome you to read more about that. That's where some of the content moderation ended up, and like cognitive search, some of that stuff's in there. So it's cool, but it's a bit beyond kind of what we're here to talk about. I'd love to talk about for 8 hours, but we don't have 8. We have about 40 minutes left. Azure OpenAI, obviously you're hearing more about that. Microsoft spent, I think, $13 billion on this, or it invested in the last 4 years. So you're seeing the Azure OpenAI service show up on a lot of the pages that talk about this stuff. It's, some of the pages show it as another cognitive service. Some of it describe it and brand it a bit differently. All of this is rebranding over time as Azure AI. So, well, that's kind of a crash course tour of what these services are and some of what they're capable of. If you're on a page and it says Azure AI, quick start, cognitive services, quick start, whatever, you're in the right place. And there are tons of fantastic quick starts on this stuff. A couple of my demos are based on those, some aren't, but no matter the language, a lot of these support 6 or 7, and it's as easy as just clicking a tab at the top and say, I want this in C# instead of Python, or vice versa, or one of the others. If any of this interests you at all, there's a lot of ways to play with this for free or for very little money. So how can we use this stuff, and how can I get my slide to advance the first time I hit the button? Hey, there we go. All right, so how can we use this stuff? So you'll see I called them APIs here. Some of the documentation does, some still calls them services, whatever, they're cool. So we'll go to the bottom first. So I just talked about all the quick starts and all that. At their core, these are REST APIs. We can write a bunch of code in a variety of languages to call them. We can even call them with T-SQL, and I'll show that at the end. I think that's really cool. But we can call these with a lot of languages, probably that some of us know a little or a lot of. So that's always open to us. But what I think is really interesting, and where I hope people find this talk interesting, is there's a lot of low code, no code ways to consume this stuff as well. So we'll start with logic apps, because that's what kind of got me my start. So logic apps I like to describe as event-driven workflow containers, and not containers in the Docker sense. Containers in the like Tupperware kitchen dish sense. It just holds a thing. And one night it might hold pasta, and one night it might hold burgers, and one night it might hold a salad, but it always kind of holds that stuff. So what logic apps are is they're driven by an event that happens. So you connect them to something. I think the last time I looked, the number of connectors is north of 350. It'll probably go over 400 here at some point if it hasn't already. I think I last checked last week. And so it'll connect to that service, and then based on whatever the thing is, you can say when an event happens over there, like a social media post. The first one I ever did was English top flight football, and I did a table for a podcast here ranking the 20 teams in the top flight based on the sentiment of their supporters' tweets. Very silly, but there's lots of cool tech that made that go. And it was like Language API version 1, but also logic apps. They enabled me to do all of this on very little money. That ran the whole season for about $500, processing tens of millions, I think hundreds of millions by the end of the season, tweets. and doing sentiment analysis and all that. Logic apps are very powerful, and their experience has come a long way from when I first started using them 6 years ago. So if that sounds interesting and like in a very cool way to connect a lot of disparate stuff in the cloud, which it is, I hope you'll go learn more about those, even if it's outside the context of what we're talking about here. Power BI. So I found this interesting. So another large client we have with a lot of people who do Power BI work, they had asked, as a lot of companies are now, we're in there working on some other data things for them. They said, hey, obviously our managers, our executives, our C whatevers, they are very interested in, AI. What can we do with it? And so we showed them the question and answer feature, which has been in Power BI in a few different forms for years. I presented on it virtually, of course, in the summer of 2020 to a couple groups. They had never seen it. So I made sure that I included it in here because that's a large place with a large staff with a lot of smart folks, and they were not aware that it was in there. And that's using natural language understanding. A lot of the stuff the language API or service kind of empowers across different tools to do that. Now your data model's got to be right and all of that, and that's something for another session. But Power BI's got this stuff in it too, and it's quite easy to set up as long as your data is good. Power Apps, same thing. So that's a low code, no code experience. We've seen a lot of maturation there. That can call some of this stuff, and you don't have to write a line of code to do it. You just have to provision it in Azure, make sure you've got your endpoint, make sure you've got your key, and plug those in where it says to, and then kind of tell it what you want it to do from there. Power Automate, kind of similar. I've got a demo of this later. Now, one caveat here I will say is Power Apps and Power Automate, especially Power Automate with the AI stuff. My account to show this has kind of the premium level of Power Automate. It is your work Office 365 may have it, it may not. So that while I show it because it's cool and this is coming to a lot of other things soon, the licensing on these can be tricky. So I want to show you how easy it is to do and how much power there is there, but understand that depending on your access to this stuff, that may cost a little bit of money. I don't want to portray that as something free, but we certainly don't want to turn this into an Office 365 licensing talk or any of the various ways you can kind of buy this stuff. But it's in Microsoft's interest for us to all use this more. So I think you'll start to see as interest builds up, well, it's probably already there, and as their capacity to process this stuff builds up, I think you'll see some of this start to work in our favor a bit, pricing wise. Language, speech, and vision. We've got a little background noise there. Thank you. Language, speech, and vision also have what they call studio experiences. So the URLs don't follow the same pattern, which is frustrating to possibly only me, but I've linked them on my resources slide. And you're going to see one of those. You're actually going to see two of them later. So what it is basically you sign into it. And again, a lot of these services have free tiers. It's not the case for OpenAI right at this second, or at least some of the stuff that I'm showing, but a lot of them do. And these studio experiences are basically a way to say, like if you heard me say earlier, you can create a custom model of your own voice and have your voice say stuff. You're like, oh, that's cool. I don't know how to do that. There's a studio experience to do that where you can click in there and say, I want to do this. And it's going to tell you, you need this type of resource. It can run on the free tier, or you need to go one up, and that's just costs a few bucks. And then it'll kind of walk you through how that happens. And there's complementary documentation. So if you find, because these studio experiences are changing almost by the day, but if you find the studio experience is a little lacking instructionally, then definitely go to the documentation, and it's quite likely to fill the gaps in for you. That's certainly how my experience was with these when I went to set one up for this session. So I think you'll find that pretty similar as well. So a lot of setup, a lot of talk about what these are, how we can consume them, and all that. and now I want to go play a little bit, and hopefully we'll all find that fun. But I will be happy to take questions because I need a drink of water.
So no questions per se, Matt, but there is a lot of football commentary going on about who topped your table, and we have a guess that Everton probably tops the table at that point in time. So at least it's got everyone talking about what AI can and can't do.
Yes. Yeah, that was, I remember I gave a speech on that particular implementation of some of this stuff in Nottingham. I believe it was in 2018. And one of the questions was who, of the teams that season, what fans had the darkest mood. And my recollection is at the time it was Everton and Swansea. I think I've got my year right. But yes, yeah, the podcast like to feature both ends. So they would talk about the happiest ones and the saddest ones. And part of what was interesting is it wasn't always the ones you would think, because it could be a small club that had hung on maybe for a point, or maybe a hard fought loss against a big club and their fans were pretty happy. Maybe a big club had won 2-0 but had looked poor and their fans were desperately angry. So that was always fun to work on. I'm so thankful that it got me into talking about this stuff. And I still remember the look on my wife's face when I told her what I was going to do. And she thought it was maybe the dumbest idea I'd ever had. But it's worked out well. So, okay.
And professionally, you've never talked about anything as much as that.
It's probably behind some other stuff, but I have given a lot of sessions on this stuff over the years, and it's so much fun to stay up with because it doesn't sit still. Not even for a week sometimes. I had to change the demo last Saturday because something had changed 2 days since I changed the last thing. So speaking of those old sessions, there used to be something, and it's still there, but it's being pretty actively deprecated. It will kind of push you over to what I'm about to show. Q&A Maker used to be a thing that when you went to go see Microsoft conferences a few years ago, it could have been me, could have been a lot of other folks, could have been Microsoft people. They were talking about, okay, question and answer stuff. You can easily wire up a chat bot and go through all this stuff and talk back and forth. It can give you information. It just takes a few minutes, doesn't cost very much, blah blah blah. Well, that experience has changed a bit. They've obviously there's been a lot of improvements in that space, but going back to where I said we're going to pretend we've taken a job at a company that the manager thinks the AI is going to replace all of his people, but he's hired us. We are going to follow the instructions that they gave us for onboarding that says, just talk to the bot. They're all too busy to talk to us, even though they'll be replaced by the AI any day now. So just go talk to the bot. So let's go do that. All right, so you'll be super impressed by my web design skills, surely. That's what everybody says the first time they see this part. That's just a gorgeous blog. But so they didn't really give us any guidance. They just said talk to the bot. The bot has said hello and welcome. And so I'll just say, what databases do we have? Because I don't know. I work there now. They didn't really tell me what to ask. Well, okay. And we get a formatted answer here. So it says kind of what we said, and then it puts a little snark in there. If you recognize the logo on the original slide, you'll know why the snark is there, or not the logo, the image. So we got SQL Server, we got Azure SQL, we've got Access. So let's see, how do I connect to SQL Server? I don't know. That's the first one. Okay, gives me a link to download Azure Data Studio, which is cool. A little more snark in point 2. And it tells us how to go through connect, gives us a very secure username and password here, and off we go. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. Still kind of weird first day talking to a bot. Not sure why I'd want to do that. But all right, so let's see. How do we connect, or how do I connect to Azure SQL? Okay, similar thing. Bot thinks the cloud is fad. Here you go. Then we have to send a fax to our data team. So we're not getting the best first impression here at all. That's send a fax. They don't report to the same VP, cloud cost centers, whole thing. Then they just say do whatever the fax says. All right. Well, there was a third one, so I got to see this one. How do I connect to Access? So that is at a data center in my hometown. It's very strange, but of course the welcome bot is on my blog, so this is all pretty strange. If you get the joke on why you should ask for Dennis, that would make me very happy. I think it's a bit obscure, but in Scotland, one person got it. Actually, two did. So yeah, this is all kind of weird, right? Like why? All right, we've pulled this up, and okay. So how did this happen? Well, we're gonna show how it happened here. So we are going to pull up this. It happened this way. So this is a formatted Word document. You're going to see hopefully that we've got just normal headings, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. You know, we've got some text. You can see where the snark came from. It's in there, though you can give these bots conversational personalities as well. I just chose to put my own in. And that's it. I wrote this up in 10 minutes or so. And then what I did is you go into Language Studio and you go to a, we'll go back here. You go to a conversational language understanding project. In fact, let's, you know what? Let's go back. Got a second here. Let's go to Language Studio so I can show you more than one of these experiences. Hopefully it will play nice. Now that I've put it on the spot, I'm not sure. Okay, so it asked me to sign in. That's part of the fun of dealing with this stuff. Sometimes you end up with a bit of a spider web of sign-ins to show different things on different accounts. Not sure why it's prompted me twice. If it prompts me a third time, we're not going to do it. Here we go. Okay, so what you see here is I call it September 2023 Q&A project. And what I went down to was, so we'll go here, and it's a custom question answering project. So we go into it, and it's actually fairly simple. It's a file upload. You know, we've got a navigation bar over here. Like I said, there's actually great documentation on this. If you go to edit knowledge base, you can edit the guts of this, and you can change the answers. You can show the context tree. You can really improve kind of the multi-turn capabilities of it. But that took me 10 minutes to set up based off one document. And just, you know, I think for data people, the number of times we probably field questions like, where does this database live? What workspace is this report or this data set? Or a lot of those kind of mundane questions that are important, but it forces us to kind of come out of focus probably for something we're doing and answer that question and context switch back. You know, something like this where we can take a formatted Word document, and it supports other types too. You can do Excel, tab separated values. They can get much more complex, but just the power something like this has, I think, is really, really cool. So this one, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep this short because our host for the evening gives a session on this that is much better than my demos here, but I do want to highlight a couple things. So for those of you not familiar with Azure Data Studio, it's worth a look. It's basically the data close cousin to Visual Studio Code. It will not replace Management Studio, but it does do certain things very well. I certainly use both. I kind of encourage you to use both. I know ADS doesn't always have the best rap. They do develop features quickly and they release a lot, but it's well worth your time. It does some cool stuff like this. So I have enabled GitHub Copilot in this, probably in the interest of time. So the live demos I found on this are not, they don't always cooperate with me the way I want. So I've done some TV food show stuff here and kind of pre-bake some things. But if you're wondering how to set this up, ADS has what are called extensions. And so what it's got here is, and there's a whole marketplace, mine are filtered here to what's installed. There's a GitHub Copilot extension. So if your GitHub account has the ability to do that, you can go install this extension. ADS will ask to reboot. And then what you'll have is GitHub Copilot experience against your SQL Server databases or Postgres or whatever you're connecting to from here. Now, a few kind of caveats to this. It doesn't always guess right. So you'll see this is one where so kind of the magic sauce in here is you'll get its suggestions by hitting tab, and it will almost try to fill in the blanks or guess based on comments like this. Oh, I'm going to give you a suggestion for this comment here to build what you asked me. But sometimes it will kind of overdo itself and overguess. And no matter how I query against this table, what I suggest, it always wants to filter it by that. I know I asked it, I was writing a query against, I think, the person.address table, because this is AdventureWorks. And I asked it, write me a query for how many people live in Seattle. And it responded with 2 million. In the database, there were only 174. So whether you'd want to call that a hallucination or something like that, it doesn't always do what you would expect. However, it's constantly getting better. A couple other things I want to note. It will give you more suggestions than just the one you tabbed through. So like I wrote this and then tabbed and got that. If you hit Control plus Enter, you'll get a whole pane over here. And it's usually 10 suggestions of what it thinks you want it to do based on what you've told it. You can also get the performance, or not necessarily performance in time, but the quality of the suggestions to improve. And there's a couple of Microsoft blogs that talk about this. I believe the phrase they use is brain dump, where you can post the table, or not post, you can paste the table creation strips or scripts above, and then you start writing this here where I write a comment like this, I hit tab, it kind of guesses its way through that, and it will do that much more intelligently because it knows the context of the tables you're trying to aim it at. Like I said, our host has an entire session on this, much more thorough, much better, much more detailed. I have this in here so you know it exists, so you keep trying to use it, so you kick the tires on it over and over again, because while it's not the most impressive Copilot experience for me yet, none of this stuff has taken long to get to the point where it becomes an incredibly valuable tool. Any questions about that? And is there actually time you're giving that session online anytime soon, so we could kind of plug that here?
I can possibly do it next month or December.
Cool.
So,
okay,
because we've got 2 free spots. We haven't lined it up yet, but I can look at doing that session online in the next month or 2.
Yeah, because that's it. In my opinion, it deserves an hour, and I can't give that here, but it's gonna be cool. And I don't know how you like. It's not there yet, but it's one of those things. Like, it's not gonna take very long for it to be really great across different languages and all that stuff. Okay, all right. So that was kind of serious. I want you to know about a real thing. This is serious. It could be, but maybe not really. So I talked about sentiment analysis earlier. So the language service, one of the things it can do is look at a piece of language and say, hey, I think that was negative. Hey, I think that was positive. Hey, I think that was neutral. And it, it can do all that, and it can do much, much more, honestly. So let me tell you the story of this demo and why I have Power Automate pulled up right now. So I mentioned logic apps and how that was kind of my first love in the no code, low code space. I attempted to build a demo where it's like, all right, I wanted incoming email, and the demo I had in mind was session feedback. Somebody really didn't like my session, and it comes to an email address of mine. The sentiment analysis happens, and then it alerts me in some way. So you can imagine this in your job. You have an angry user, an angry developer, an angry manager, something like that. And we're not always the best at looking our emails. Sometimes we get a lot of them, and it's just you can't get through them that day. But some of them need to rise to that level of attention where it's like, oh boy, I got to go do something. So that's what I was trying to do. I had done things with Logic Apps and the language service for years. To their credit, the result set that comes back from the language service gets richer and richer all the time, which is great, but it started to become pretty complex in Logic Apps to do what I was trying to do, and it started to get, and this is not a technical term, a little bit codey, where I was probably having to like edit some JSON and all that, and it really got away from the demo that I would have wanted to show in this talk, because trying to show a lot of these low code, no code, kind of easy ways to consume AI stuff and just light that spark for you to go do something cool where you are. And I got really frustrated. And so I was like, well, all right, Power Apps, yeah, that's cool. I'm going to go to Power Automate. I had seen a session on it at BITS this year, Power Automate 101. Alexander Klein showed a lot of cool stuff. I was like, well, I'm going to go kick the tires on that. I have not messed with that a lot. So when you pull up Power Automate, the Copilot experience is most of the screen. You've got kind of this left blade over here, but here when you first sign in, it talks that there's a Copilot experience. Okay. So I told Copilot, when I receive a negative email, send me a Teams message. And it chewed on that for a bit. And a couple minutes later, I got a flow entitled this, which is pretty much what I asked it. So you use the AI services in here via their AI builder, I'll say conduits. And it built this. Now I had to tweak a couple things and tell it, well, what email address do you want to monitor? What this. So I'm going to go ahead and send the email here. So this is somebody, not a huge fan of this session. Please do better next time. Okay, so we'll fire that off. And while I'm doing that, this is the flow it made. Like I said, I had to tweak some settings. I didn't have to adjust anything else. The demo that I had wrestled with Logic Apps, probably 4 to 5 hours. This wrote in 10 minutes. So I want to contrast the Copilot experiences here a bit. They're all going to be really cool soon, if they're not already. This one's pretty impressive. Now, like I said, the licensing around Power Automate can be a little bit of a challenge, but I also feel like other than that session at BITS and a couple other folks that speak on it, I didn't know a lot about it. I haven't seen a lot about it beyond the people that I work with that do some client work with it. So it takes an email that comes into my work address, knowing that it's likely to be an HTML to text email, strips out just the text. We're not doing sentiment analysis on, tags and things like that. It starts to initialize the services to identify what the language is, so it can analyze the sentiment and all that. It's spinning this up. It detects the language, because to do proper sentiment analysis, it's got to know that first. It kind of applies it to each text block that it sees. It analyzes positive or negative or neutral. It sets it, and then it does and it can do this in Slack. It can do this in a wide variety of other ways. This is the way I wanted to show it. So it posts a card in a chat or channel. So even though I have my notifications off, in case somebody from work sends me something we're not supposed to see, what I do have is here. So it should, it's set to do not disturb. Okay, well, fair enough. So what I'll do is I'll show you kind of the last time this ran, what it did. This is not going to update unless I turn that off, and then, yeah. Okay, so you'll see when I ran this for a user group about a week ago, I just said not a huge fan of your session today, and it returns neutral. I found that was interesting because I think for humans, when somebody says, I'm not a huge fan of that, I think most of us interpret that as negative. It's not harsh, it's not mean, but it seems negative. This interprets it neutral, and it's a way to show, as cool as this thing are, AI basically wrote this demo for me and did the vast majority of the work. You still want humans looking at this. So if you're thinking about using sentiment analysis to raise alerts on negative messages and things like that, now it finally came through because I was sitting here on it. It's not going to be maybe everything you expect in all the different ways we use language and things like that. Now, there's a couple here that are more obvious. If you're a fan of American football / hand egg, I was raised in Chicago. The Bears are terrible this year. So I wrote this just to get my feelings out a little bit about that. That it knew obviously was very negative. That's clear, not very good at all. Negative. And the one it sent me tonight, still neutral, because it says I was not a huge fan. Please do better. You know, you can argue what that range is, and there's a lot of interesting documentation on how it defines neutral. That is a bit too nerdy for this. But so that, like I said, that started out one way, that ended a very different way. You know, AI essentially wrote that for me, but you get a chance to see Power Automate. You get a chance to see the power of these services at work. It wasn't hard to set up at all. It did it for me. You can also integrate vision and speech and all those sorts of things. There's some really cool stuff here. So we got a couple more things to close out because we got 7-8 minutes here. All right, so AI wrote a song and performed it. Really? So what we're going to do, because it's a voice memo on my phone, because it does not present virtually well, the way the audio works and all that. So I'm going to give you a tape. We'll get about 60 seconds of this, and I'll show you why I showed you this. Oh, my volume's down. That would help. Okay, here we go.
Rain so cold. There's a DBA lurking, or so I've been told, with a glare that could freeze the sun's warmest ray. They're the ruler of databases in a harsh, stern way. Oh, our company's DBA, you're the meanest we've seen. With your queries and commands, like a database fiend. But beneath that tough exterior, there's a heart, we believe. So let's sing this song and try to find some reprieve behind those SQL statements and database views. There's a human being with their share of blues. Maybe they've had their battles, their own trials and strife. Let's try to understand and bridge this gap of life. In the end, we'll laugh and code as one. With our DBA, we'll get the job done. Through patience and respect, we'll make it through. A company united with our hearts renewed.
Okay, so that might have seemed silly, right? 100% was. Why did I show you that? So we're going to pull this up here. So I asked ChatGPT to write a song about our new company that we've gone to work at that's odd and seems mean, and even the bots are kind of ornery and all of that. So that was 64 seconds long. ChatGPT wrote an intro, an outro, a bridge, a chorus, and I think a second bridge in 5 verses. The original reading of that would have been over 5 minutes. Nobody wants to see that. But what I hope we do want to see, and so you see this is the speech studio here. So we're going through some stuff. You can see where translation, real-time speech to text batch, custom speech, there's the custom models in here, captioning. So this, it's trying to say like, hey, here's some common ways you might want to use this. What I did down here, so custom voice is where you can make your voice. Audio content creation is what I did. So that first goes to my files. You'll see files or song lyrics. And I hope what you noticed in there is that there was emotion in the voice. It's certainly early days for that. But some parts sounded angry, I hope. Some parts it seemed like it was whispering. Some parts it was shouting. That's all SSML here. So it's a markup language for Speech Studio and the service and APIs that power it and all of that to give emotion to speech. So if you think back to our welcome bot at the start, we're another session's worth of work away from it responding verbally if we want it to, with emotion if we want it to, beyond just kind of personality setting and some of that. So you see those tags here. And you may say, Matt, we want to see the markup. Show it to you. It's a hot mess. You don't want to see it. So it gives you these nice ways to kind of select something, format it, say, I want this to be angry, this to be whispering, and all of that. So silly example to show you that ChatGPT can actually be kind of funny. And also you can convey emotion in speech, which is pretty new to this stuff. And you see some of it sounds spot on. Some of it I would argue does not. But hopefully you think that's cool. Any questions about that before we get into our last demo here?
Nothing at the moment, Matt.
Okay, so I will take very little credit for this demo except for one part. So Buck Woody and Brian Spendolini at Microsoft are doing very cool stuff blogging about this and showing us how. So you'll see this is a cheap Azure SQL database serverless DB. This is T-SQL. This is just query editor. I haven't used Data Studio, SSMS, no smoke and mirrors here at all. This is T-SQL to, unsurprisingly, write a query against AdventureWorks and then create, content from the OpenAI service describing that. So the prompt is basically, so we'll walk through this. We've got the ad copy here. This is the AdventureWorks sample that it loads with Azure with Azure SQL if you check that tick box. We declare our URL, which is I provisioned an Azure OpenAI service, and that's my endpoint there. That's my API key. I'll rotate it after this, so please don't steal it, but if you do, you won't get to use it very long. And then the payload is this, and it's just a prompt. It says you are an AI assistant that helps people find information. Fair enough. And then kind of what the user role is. You're an experienced marketing expert. Generate 2,000 letters of ad copy for, and that's the results of our query. And then we've got some other things down here to actually make that call. So this is not everywhere in the SQL Server in Azure SQL Universe yet, but in Azure SQL it's there except for Managed Instance. SP invoke external REST endpoint. So kind of going back to where we started and saying, well, we can call code to write this. That's what's happening here. And this all looks pretty normal. URL, we send it as a post, headers, payload, all that. So when we run it, now I will say the performance on this is kind of interestingly variable. Some of that's probably because I have a serverless database. I don't know if some of that's also due to the service as well. If it stretches on, okay, so that's not too bad. I've seen anything from 1 second to about 35. So when we select this out, we will use everybody's favorite text editor, Notepad. We'll get that dragged over here. Oh, would help if it would actually move. There we go. And so we've got a lot of payload stuff that comes back, right? So we don't necessarily care about that. You can see the model it used to write, GPT-3.5 Turbo. You can see some stuff about content and all of that. And then we get some ad copy. Dear bike enthusiasts, are you looking for a high performance bike that won't break the bank? Blah, blah, blah. That's T-SQL calling a chat GPT style model. And that's all there is to it. It really is that simple. This, again, did not take me very long to set up because Brian and Buck are awesome and doing really good work here. One thing I do want to show you, though. So where this says you are an experienced marketing expert, generate 2,000 letters of ad copy. Before SQL Saturday, Minnesota, I did that. And I changed the prompt to you are an overworked, sarcastic, exhausted marketing expert. Write me 200 words of marketing content for that bike. And it starts here and says, wow, an ad copy for a bike that delivers high performance on a budget. What a challenge, blah, blah, blah. Says this is my favorite part. This bike might just perform your X without breaking your bank account. ChatGPT has bike jokes. That's the title of that file. But again, it's all that simple. You've got an endpoint. Even if you're not a dev, the blog walks you through in great detail what all this is. And then how you can kind of customize it to meet your needs. And you can think of the power that might have where you can get the results of a query and then have those be described or otherwise worked with the power of models like that. So with that, let's get back to what we learned. Hopefully we learned a couple things. I learned that my son didn't go to bed on time because he keeps poking his head in here trying to figure out why I'm making noise. So how will AI impact data people? It can help us do our jobs. We talked about these conversational language bots that can handle questions we'd rather not because we want to focus on other stuff, and they can do a really good job with us just supplying them with a thorough document. Copilot experiences across this ecosystem. We can automate responses to tickets, to emails, whatever. And again, kind of get that menial part of our day out of the way, or at least in a place where we can handle it so we don't have to context switch as much, and we can do the hard work that's really fun with a focus. We can have ChatGPT write songs if we get bored, but the point is we're surrounded by this already. It's in almost every tool you're in. It's in Outlook, it's in Bing, it's in Google. So embrace it. It is certainly overhyped, but it's not going anywhere. It's going to change the way we do work. It'll change some people's jobs. I don't think it's going to take away data professional jobs, but it's certainly going to bend the way we do a lot of things. And this session will change every time I do it. So if you sat there and you're like, man, that was cool, I'd like to try that. Whether you try it tomorrow, next week, next month, next 3 months, whatever, take a few minutes to play with this stuff and see if you can do cool things too. There's so much out there. So I mentioned there's a list of resources here. Kind of everything I showed on how to do that is mostly documented here. Buck's session to get into the real technical guts of how generative AI works, where it came from, arguably where it's going, all that is great. And again, Buck's an awesome speaker, very engaging, very funny, all that. If you like to buy books, they're mine. My wife is very impressed when somebody buys one. Here's where I work. Here's what I've written. Here's what I race. I'm SQL at speed everywhere to find me. Those slides will be up right after that, right after this. Getting a little late here. And with that, I am through. Thank you so much. Is there anything that anybody wants to chat about? I can hang on a few more minutes.
Thank you, Matt. That was a very good session covering such a wide range of different things that are available to us. So as you mentioned, people may be aware of the different Copilot experiences, and they change depending on which application you're working with those Copilots. So yeah, it's ever expanding, and everybody here, as Matt said, does he think that it's you're going to lose your job over this? No, I don't think so either. I think you just need to embrace, and it can help you learn other things. So, Adam, you raised your hand.
That was an error, but I would like to say great presentation. And we're all really looking forward to seeing how this positively impacts our roles and what we can do with our foundational knowledge on the data systems at the places we work. But yeah, thanks heaps. Really enjoyed the session.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun to talk about and always fun to keep up with. And like I said, I try to call out there where I think the licensing is a bit of a challenge. I want you to know about it. I feel like that's going to bend our way, but maybe isn't right now.
They're going to have to start offering university degrees in Microsoft licensing one day.
That would be fantastic. It is very difficult to keep up with. So my company actually, it's the first place I've worked that has this. We have somebody who specializes purely in that across all this stuff. And it is wonderful to have somebody like that because it's hard to stay on top of when you're doing the work in that area too. So yeah, big fan of that. But they need to make it simpler. They need to make it even easier to consume than it is. But like I said, I think this stuff's kind of headed that way. It'll have to, because Amazon or somebody will start giving more away for free, and Microsoft will have to chase them.
I'm sure none of the licensing will change in the 3 years it takes to get a university degree.
Yeah, they only change it every 5 or 6 years, right? Not 5 or 6 months, sometimes maybe even 5 or 6 weeks. I don't know. But it's all fun to play with, and most everything I showed tonight, Power Automate is the only thing. Like that level of account for me is $15 a month. Everything else was free or maybe just a few cents, maybe $1 here. So it's not bad and it's fun.
Any other questions from anybody before we sign off with Matt? Feel free to raise your hand and come off of mute, or if you don't want to come off of mute, you can put it in the chat window. So just while we give that, big thank you to Matt for giving up his time and taking us through just what AI is available for us in many different contexts for us as data people that we can look to learn from and experience and grow on this journey as it changes so quickly. As I mentioned at the start of the call, if you haven't already, you can register for Data Community Pass Summit over in Seattle and continue your learning. So thank you, everybody. Stay tuned for our sessions next month, and I look forward to seeing you all online once again to continue your learning. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. See you.